Hi, I'm Dr. Bill O'Neill. I'm professor of clarinet at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. The bumper stickers used to say, I'm not from Texas, but I got here as fast as I could, and that would be my story. I arrived here in 1992, and it's been pretty wonderful, especially in January. I grew up in Canada. Do I need to tell you more than that? Today we're going to address the three all-region Etudes that you'll be auditioning on in another couple of months. For starters, we'll give you some background, some things that might just help your general clarinet playing before we get into the specifics. You're going to have one of three reactions to anything that I tell you today, just as you have one of those same three reactions when any of your teachers at school tell you anything, assuming you don't think that we're wrong. And your first reaction is, I knew that. And I will tell you things that you already know. And that's okay. Sometimes it's nice to be told that you're right. The second reaction will be, that's great, why didn't I think of it? In which case you probably would have sooner or later. It fits in there with this body of knowledge that you put together about music over the course of your life. And that body of knowledge is probably about 90% right. So when you have the wow, of course reaction, it fits in there, makes the picture a little more complete. And very often it's two bits of information that you hadn't thought of connecting, but for some reason they get connected and like your progress goes right off the graph for a month or two until you use it up, and then hopefully you don't do this or this. More likely your progress goes at a more normal, sane rate until the next wow moment happens. Your third reaction will be, huh? And I'll tell you things that don't fit in there with what you already know. They don't quite make sense, but doesn't mean they're wrong, just outside of the body of knowledge that you have. So, moving on, qualities of great clarinetists. Great clarinetists have great tone, great technique, great articulation, and a concept of artistic phrasing. So for starters then, great tone. Great tone is strong at all dynamic levels. You're playing pianissimo, it's a strong pianissimo. It gets out into the audience, it's heard, makes a difference in the texture of what's going on. If they can't hear you, you won't impress them. This is especially true in these auditions. You need, in order to have great tone, you need a good mouthpiece. That's the most important part of any clarinet, or if you're a doubler of any clarinet or saxophone. If you don't have a good mouthpiece, you will not sound good. Your control will not be adequate. Just lots of bad things. And if you do, you are one happy person and you enjoy practicing. Too many kids quit the instrument because they sound terrible in their own ears, and it's not their fault. It's that they don't have a good mouthpiece. All your equipment needs to be in good repair. Every 6 months or so, take it into the shop, have them look it over. They might charge you a few bucks for it. It's worth it. If the instrument doesn't work properly, you're going to be frustrated, and that'll make you not want to practice, and the whole thing, there's a little death spiral going on here. So if you have a leaky pad and they find it before it becomes a serious problem, replace that pad. Costs you, I don't know, $8 or $10, something like that. But if it's leaking, everything below that point gets progressively worse and worse and worse. Unresponsive, unhappy, squeak prone, that sort of thing. We have four variables in where we meet the mouthpiece. Where we meet the clarinet, which is the mouthpiece. The first variable is how open is the tip of your mouthpiece. Now, most of you have had maybe 2 or 3, maybe still only one mouthpiece, and so you don't have a lot of experience to know that the more open the tip of the mouthpiece, and they come in all kinds of ranges of tip opening, the more open it is, the softer the reed needs to be because it has to flap farther. But if you have a soft reed, that seems like, oh, well, that's great then. But if you have a closer facing on your mouthpiece, the thing will just go pop and shut down, and there's no place for the wind to go. And so what's when you play like that, which is not a good thing. So we need a balance of tip opening, facing we call it, strength of reed, size of bite, how big a chomp you take. If it's a little tiny one, if you instinctively go there, it will shut down rather easily. You'll need a very strong reed because otherwise you're going to shut it down, just like we talked about. Strength of bite. How big, how powerful are you at whatever size of bite you want to take. So those four things need to be in balance. And then play sharper. That's a dangerous thing to say. It's possible to get too sharp, pinched and strained, but it's not likely. Play sharper, then tune down. Do some warm-ups each day with a tuner and support the instrument. Don't allow it to droop, and give lots of wind and a fairly firm bite, and you'll find out what that means. The reed will respond well. There's lots of good things that happen. Great technique. All your equipment has to be in good condition. Sounds like something we said a moment ago. It's true. Everything below a leaky pad is going to be sluggish and unresponsive, and maybe worse. You want good, consistent position. We want to keep the fingers near work, ideally curved. If we all started playing when we were little people, and so we're doing survival playing, but we want to tame this thing. You can't possibly lift a collapsed finger as fast, as little, or as under control as you can a curved one. Now this is worth investing some intellectual and practice effort in. Always practice the hardest spots first and most, and then work outward. So if you've got a 50 measure piece and measure 28 and 29, just eat your lunch, don't start at measure 1. Figure out 28, 29, play them under tempo. Play them a bunch of times. Practice is not repetition. Practice is repeated success. So succeed 10, 20 times at those two measures. That could take you a minute and a half. Add a third measure, probably before. Play that successfully a bunch of times. Add another measure before. Play that successfully a bunch of times. Add another measure, probably before. So on. Add one or two measures afterwards. Tomorrow you come back and you do the same thing all over again. You get there. It's very good. Use a metronome. If you hate the metronome, point 1 on my door is tough. Get over it. Your metronome is your very best, one of your very best friends in music. It will not let you compromise on rhythm unless you ignore it, in which case you shouldn't. So there. But there's a theoretical possibility that 80 people in an 80-piece band can all be wrong exactly together. But it's not going to happen. The way that we're going to be really tight and beautiful and together is for all of us to be right. And that's where your metronome comes in. And you practice with it and you get really good. And then after a while you don't hear it anymore because you're almost always playing something on top of the metronome. And so you're covering it up. That's a pretty good thing too. Slow practice, short sections, then gradually increase both, and do this early and do it every day. We will look at some of these spots in the Etudes in a moment. Great articulation. Do some work on articulation. Usually it's useful to play the end of a phrase, a staccato phrase, for instance, and you play the note where it ends, and then you play the note that approaches where it ends. You play them ta-ta, 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 ta-ta. Practice is repeated success. Then ta-ta-ta, 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 ta-ta-ta. And you keep adding one more note, and at some point you crash and burn, and you start over again. Don't assume the technique didn't work. Do the last note, the resolution, the preparation, ta-ta, ta-ta, here we go again. And you do this over several days. Sometimes you conquer things in a day. A lot of times it takes a few days. Sometimes a lot of days. So I have a Coke bottle parable that I'll tell you sometime if we get a moment. So we practice from slow to fast with a metronome. We practice from few to many with a metronome. We don't bite excessively. If you feel like you're shutting down your reed, try tucking in a little bit of the top lip too. And if you bite too hard, it will hurt. And so you'll teach yourself that pretty quickly. Practice the end of a phrase. Succeed many times, things we've already discussed here. When you self-destruct, restart the entire procedure. And there should be very little overlap. If this is your reed, There should be a little, not this, your tongue on the reed, certainly not this, but under the tip of the reed, and your tongue is very flexible, so it'll block the tip without you having to bite any harder, and then you articulate that way. Artistic phrasing. Every phrase is going somewhere, and I call this growth, maturation, and fade. And just for your information, the maturation point is the key to the whole thing. It's generally going to be late in the phrase because everything that happens after that is losing interest. It's winding down. Late in the phrase and almost always on a strong beat, usually 1. You should work on scales every day. You didn't want to hear me say that, but you know it's true, and so just do. You can invest 6 or 7 minutes a day, maybe 10, on these really valuable patterns because everybody who knows what they're talking about has told you that you should do this. So put on the adulthood that you need to and pursue these useful, boring patterns. And then I think we'll move on to the technical passages in our music.